Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, 60 glorious minutes of multifaceted discussion where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and we feature the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Coming up in the next hour, on the eve of the swearing in of a new cabinet in Nigeria, we'll look back at 2015, a time when the first transition from one civilian president, Goodluck Jonathan, to another, Muhammadu Buhari, took place. Expectations were high, and I took a road trip across Nigeria to gauge the mood and the state of the country as President Buhari took charge of the nation. We'll have a chance to take another look at that documentary as Mr Buhari prepares to swear in his new second-term cabinet. And later, on the back of that documentary 4 years ago, and after 6 months since the presidential election, which brought Mr Buhari a second term, happened in February, we'll speak to the leader of the ruling APC party in the UK to get his assessment of how things have improved or not in Nigeria since 2015. All that in a moment. Now, they say that to move forward, you have to look back. And that's what we're going to do today. 4 years ago, Nigeria marked 50 years of independence from British colonial rule. It was 2015, a year when the first transition from one civilian president, Goodluck Jonathan, to another, Muhammadu Buhari, took place peacefully. But for many Nigerians, it was a time for celebration as it was for reflection. Celebration of how this country has grown from a backwater 5.5 decades ago to become Africa's biggest economy and most populous nation today, a symbol and a signal to Africans everywhere. But also a time for considered reflection on the country's serious security concerns, endemic corruption, staggeringly high unemployment, and crumbling infrastructure. Well, that was in 2015, a year in which I took a road trip across 5 of the 6 geopolitical zones to gauge the mood and state of the country as President Buhari was taking over the leadership of Nigeria. Well, on the eve of the swearing in of Mr Buhari's cabinet, which he hopes will take the country forward to a better, more prosperous future, let's take another look at that Arise News documentary, which was first broadcast in 2015. I'm Charles Aniagolu in Abuja. 5 years ago, I reported from Nigeria on the challenge of leadership as the country turned 50. Nigerians at all levels, including President Muhammadu Buhari, who was still in political wilderness at the time, expressed profound dissatisfaction with the state of the nation and the level of achievement of Nigeria's leaders. In an interview with me at his home in Kaduna, northern Nigeria, 5 years ago, Mr Buhari explained why things had not gone the way Nigerians had hoped since independence in 1960.
It's corruption. Our institutions, the police, the civil service, the judiciary, and of course education, healthcare, even ordinary drinking water. It's amazing really how the system has collapsed in this country. We are really a failed state.
Today, Mr Buhari is no longer in political wilderness, but has been given charge of the presidency of Nigeria. And with it has come cautious hope. But 5.5 decades after breaking the chains of colonialism, some say not much has changed. Nigeria still appears to be a country on the brink of nationhood, still searching for a corporate vision that will unite all its disparate parts in that vision.
It's all about appointments. And Yorubas will be very happy if many Yorubas are appointed. Igbos will be very happy if many Igbos are appointed. Hausa people will be very happy if Hausa people are appointed. All of which has nothing, in my view, or very little indeed, to do with democracy.
Others say that with the Nigerian economy now the biggest in Africa, the country is witnessing a tremendous surge in international interest and is today one of the most durable and enduring centres of commerce and culture in Africa.
I've seen Nigeria go through, its evolution to its current state, and I mean, it's just amazing to see how much this country has grown and developed over those years.
Our 50 years of independence, 50 years of growth, 50 years of prosperity. 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 50 years of growth, 50 As Nigeria looks towards a future in which its economic and cultural presence will be felt ever more strongly on the global stage, there is still an unsettled feel here, and the sense that 55 years after independence, with an insurgency raging in the northeast and youth unemployment at staggeringly high levels, it won't take much more than the spark of a tinderbox for the forges of discontent to flare a very bright red indeed.
Most of us here now have hoped for 20 years, some 30 years, and they cannot make anything. So we are praying for God to touch the mind of the government, for them to bring jobs for us.
When somebody wants to be employed in Nigeria, they will ask you to pay money. How can you pay money to be employed in any ministry in Nigeria? Or like, for example, let me use the police as a case study. When somebody pay money to be employed to become a policeman, that means there will be corruptions.
Like we are sitting here, they're supposed to find something for we to be doing, not like sitting idle.
The streets especially are not smiling.
A journey of 1,000 miles starts with a step. I believe that in the next future, things are going to get better.
With the massive collapse in oil prices, the certainties that had underpinned Nigeria's economy for 55 years lie in tatters, shattered into fragments by a corrupt elite, a catastrophe instigated by gross financial recklessness. No one seems to know what will happen next. Well, rather than speculate and listen to armchair analysts, I decided to take to the road and discover for myself where this country has been, where it is now, and where it hopes to be. From the arid north to the rainforests of the south, I, along with Boris, Arise News' cameraman, and Moses, our driver, crisscrossed Nigeria, discovering a country of enormous diversity, unbounded potential, and yes, untrammeled chaos. We began our journey by travelling to the desert savanna zone in the northwest of Nigeria, to the Emirate of Daura in Katsina State, an ancient seat of Islamic culture and learning, and the spiritual home of the Hausa ethnic group.
Yes, you are welcome to the first palace.
Thank you very much.
In present-day Daura.
In addition to its great wealth of myths and legends, and its reputation as an ancient seat of Islamic culture and learning, Daura is today most notable as the town where Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari was born and raised. This is the actual house where President Buhari grew up.
Hello. Is this his sister? Yeah.
I was told by President Buhari's relatives who grew up with him that the president still visits this house periodically. More than 200 years after Daura was conquered by the British, the colonial influence lives on in the town's enduring fascination with the English Premier League. Beyond that, Daura has little to show for its amazing history in terms of development. Everywhere, the ravages of poverty are evident. From Daura, we headed to Kano, a city considered to be the commercial nerve center of northern Nigeria. For years, this heavily Islamic city controlled the groundnut trade in West Africa, and even at one stage the world. But where there were once pyramids of the cash crop, today there are little, almost insignificant piles, leveled by the discovery of crude oil. And now the very heart of this city of trans-Saharan businessmen, once the beating pride of the economy of northern Nigeria, is now a shriveled nut, withered by the impact of the Boko Haram insurgency, suddenly unsure of itself. Beyond the economic impact, the psychological and physical damage wrought by the Boko Haram attacks has taken an even bigger toll on the inhabitants of the city. Victor Simone was lucky to escape with his life, but he's been scarred forever.
As about entering the vehicle, That's when the explosion occurred. It has been a very bad experience.
But there is another side to Kano. His Royal Highness Sanusi Lamida Sanusi coming forth to meet his guests and his people. This is what sets the Hausa Fulani North apart from the rest of Nigeria. Centuries of tradition, a people steeped in, and some would say held down by customs dating back more than 1,500 years. Back in Abuja, I drove past promenades full of cafes, bars, restaurants and shops, and headed for the smart Transcorp Hilton Hotel. And I'm here to meet a friend from London who's promised to take me on a rather special tour of her favourite city, Abuja.
It's a fantastic place to be. You can actually feel the heartbeat of Nigeria as soon as you get off the plane. I love it. The people are just so enthusiastic and dynamic about life. They're always smiling. Nothing seems to be too much of a problem for them. So it's a great place to be. Yeah.
Excellent. So I'm really looking forward to this tour.
This shop actually is one of my favourite shops here in this particular market. I just love the colours. You know, Nigerian fabric is just amazing. It's always so bright and colourful, but every print is unique. You very rarely find two pieces of clothing that are the same. So, you know, you can be walking down the street and it's very rare that you'll come across somebody wearing the same thing.
Might be a bit bright for London, though.
Yeah, it might be. But hey, London could do with some brightening up, right? We're at a restaurant called Hungry Man, and they serve, Nigerian food. So it's a typical Nigerian restaurant, which is sometimes also called Bukkas. And I've actually ordered moi moi, which is my favourite. And moi moi is basically, it's a bean cake, and it's beans that have been boiled and they're mashed up, and then there's African spices added to it. My friends are eating okra, which is, again, it's one of the most popular Nigerian dishes. And okra is a green vegetable that's also sometimes referred to or known as ladyfingers. And that's the main vegetable within this dish.
We set out to explore Nigeria's vast musical heritage.
Every single type of music you can think of, it's in Nigeria. But one of the most popular forms of music is African high life. And African high life music is made up of a blend of traditional African rhythms, Latin music, jazz, Caribbean sounds.
Jackie, I've got to say it's been absolutely marvellous having you give me this extraordinary tour. I think your knowledge of Nigeria is absolutely superb.
That's absolutely no problems at all, Charles. I'm glad you've enjoyed it.
Later in the night, we found a different side to Abuja.
My place, your hotel.
If you check the route of most ladies who are involved in prostitution, they come from a family where the girls are directly the ones feeding that family.
The next day, we left Abuja and headed out into the center of Nigeria. If there is one place where Nigeria's colonial legacy can be said to have been woven, it is the historic town of Lokoja, capital of Kogi State in north-central Nigeria. Everywhere you look, colonial monuments abound. They've come to define the city. And it was here, at this very spot, that the British Governor-General, Lord Lugard, raised the Union Jack 100 years ago and declared Nigeria to be under the authoritarian heel of the colonial British Crown. Here also that West Africa's two biggest rivers, the Niger and the Benue, meet, Lokoja aptly called the confluent city. It was while looking at the majestic river Niger that Flora Shaw, later Mrs. Lugard, coined the name Nigeria. As we headed out to Benin, capital of the Midwest, we found an entire landscape of Nigerian roads littered with car crashes that, with a little regulation, could have been avoided, but instead has been allowed to grow until it's throttled the lives of hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of Nigerians. Someone said it was like kids playing dodgem in an amusement park. Speed limits are not observed and most cars are not roadworthy. There are no driving tests and anyone can buy a license. So in this area, Nigeria has regressed badly because it never used to be this way. Today, road accidents are the biggest killer here. One example that is absolutely central in understanding how Nigeria has fallen back 55 years after independence. Soon enough, we fell victim to the hazards of Nigerian roads when a hit-and-run driver tore into the front bull bars of our vehicle. We were forced to stop at one of many makeshift mechanic shops that dot the motorways across Nigeria. While we waited for the car to be fixed, I was struck by the fact that several people who were not part of the mechanic's shop turned up to lend a helping hand, making suggestions about how best to repair the car, being generally supportive and full of neighbourly concern, expecting nothing in return. It left me feeling extremely positive about this country as we headed out once more across the land. Soon, though, I was confronted with another terrible reality: staggering levels of poverty all along the dusty and polluted route lined with ramshackle settlements people call home. Children who should be in school, adults who deserve better, hawking their miserable wares, literally eking out an existence. The idea of people living on less than $2 a day took on a whole new meaning. One thing's for sure: if President Buhari is serious about drastically reducing poverty, he's got his work cut out for him. It is nearly 4 p.m. and in the high heat of the day, our trusted four-wheel drive, battered by water, mud, gigantic craters and potholes on the roads, suddenly conks out.
The car's broken down. There was speculation that we bought bad fuel on the road, which is one of the things you encounter in Nigeria. They mix the fuel with oil in order to increase the quantity of it and sell it to you, and therefore your car gets damaged. But we've just found a mechanic after hanging around for 25 minutes, and he's told us that it does appear as though a pipe that leads from the fuel pump to the engine has cut, so he's trying to patch it up at the moment. The horror of all of this is that it's 4:15 late afternoon, and if this is not fixed, we're going to be caught up in the dark, which is an extremely dangerous thing to do in the middle of nowhere in Nigeria. Just get cutaways.
One only for... You don't need clip.
We've been here now for at least an hour, and the mechanic is still fiddling around. So we don't quite know what the deal is. But the hope is, of course, that, we'll get going very soon. So far, we await the verdict from the roadside mechanic and hope he doesn't do more damage than, what has actually happened. Because the problem is oftentimes these guys have no knowledge of cars that are quite sophisticated, sort of like the Hummer Jeep. And so in the process of trying to fix it, they do more damage. So we'll have to watch and see. Hopefully it'll all be all right. I'm placing my trust in the Nigerian roadside mechanic.
Finally, the car's patched up and we're on the move again, taking in the sights, sounds and horrors of Nigerian roads. In the frenetic city of Benin, capital of Edo State in Nigeria, history is everything. Amid the swirl of sights and sounds in this Midwestern metropolis, The city proudly displays its greatest icons, statues of the kings and queens of the famous Benin Empire that thrived here from about 900 AD until the turn of the 19th century. But Benin is not a city living in the past, but one that is attempting to use its extraordinary legacy to re-empower and rebuild itself. Here at the Holy Aruosa Cathedral, they're trying to do just that. Aruosa has been around since the 16th century, re-emerging today as a symbol of a resurgent syncretic religion, inspired by both Christianity and the traditions of Benin. It's steadily regaining popularity and is now considered to be the official religion of the people of Benin.
Benin is back up with a very, very influential history, very, very influential background. Our tradition and culture is second to none in the whole world.
On the other side of town, buried amongst the shabby streets, another aspect to this historical city, an artist's colony, drawing inspiration from the mists of a once great past. More than 4,000 pieces of art similar to these bronzes were looted by British soldiers after they conquered the Kingdom of Benin in 1897. When they were first seen in Europe, art critics were astounded, hardly believing that such technically accomplished pieces were created by African artists. None of those priceless works of art have ever been returned. The next day, we continued our road trip across Nigeria to mark 55 years of this country's independence, setting our sights on the town in southwest Nigeria, where the Yorubas, one of West Africa's most numerous ethnic groups, are believed to have originated. If myths had a home in Nigeria, Ife would be it. Amidst the crumbling infrastructure in this ancient town lies a great wealth of legends. Stories abound of worlds under the earth and sea, journeys to heaven, and invaders from the sky. The biggest of them all was a deity known as Oduduwa, a strutting dictator and military tactician who's believed to have descended from the sky around 500 BC to become the progenitor of the Yoruba ethnic group, all the lesser chiefs for miles around cowering at his awesome presence. But although the history and the legends remain prominent, this town has bequeathed other legacies to Nigeria. It currently dominates the trade in timber for hundreds of miles around. It's raised environmental concerns about deforestation and its deleterious effects. The arguments for and against deforestation have been taking place mostly in the hallowed, very green grounds of one of Africa's great institutions of higher learning, the University of Ife, renamed Obafemi Awolowo University, in honor of one of Nigeria's eminent founding fathers. In addition to his contribution to the development of education in Western Nigeria, Chief Awolowo, along with the likes of the Western region's first governor, Adesoji Aderemi, managed to keep this region from being ethnically or religiously restive. The result is that the Yorubas of Ife and elsewhere are the most religiously tolerant and liberal in Nigeria. We continued on our journey, leaving the legacy of Ife's religious tolerance behind and entering the oil-producing belt. The oil city of Warri, Nigeria's major petroleum hub, dominated by a seaport, petrol tankers, an oil refinery, oil companies, and one of the city's most common sights, workers protesting against the oil companies. Despite the discovery of oil, unemployment continues to mushroom here, the expected prosperity never materializing.
If I want to score the dividends we are getting through the oil we are producing is about 30%, if not below.
Today, Warri is steeped in decline, a great people gone to seed despite their magnificent past. Every Nigerian knows the immortal name Nana of Ichekiri, the Warri traditional ruler who in 1894 dared to take on the might of colonial Britain. The British sent in Admiral Bedford, who, commanding a 4-ship Royal Navy, unleashed enormous cannon power against Nana, as shown in this rare picture. Nana lost the battle along with his considerable resources and vast trading empire shown here, all of it razed to the ground by the unforgiving Brits. From Warri, we headed further into the rainforest, lashed by the relentless monsoon waters from the sky, travelling deeper still into the waterlogged belt of the Niger Delta, passing through Port Harcourt, considered to be the capital of this sweltering, oil-polluted region. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Now let's look at various pressure points on President Buhari as he prepares to swear in his new cabinet tomorrow. In the 4 years since Mr Buhari has been in office, what has he achieved? Well, while some argue that he's made some progress in tackling corruption, many disagree, saying that nothing much has changed as far as that is concerned. There are also howling complaints about the state of infrastructure, with roads still hideously potholed and regular power cuts still a problem. And with the government's budget deficit growing and its domestic and foreign debt increasing, there are many concerns about the direction the Nigerian economy is headed. Well, in a moment, we'll be speaking to one man who offered unqualified support to Mr Buhari in the last 4 years and during the election. His name is Prince Ade Omole, leader of the ruling All Progressives Congress Party, the APC, in the UK. He'll join me in a moment. But just before we talk to him, let's see the tail end of that documentary that featured an Arise Cruise road trip across Nigeria in 2015. Beneath the mangrove swamps of the Niger Delta lies Nigeria's oil wealth, tens of billions of dollars worth. Yet for the inhabitants of the Niger Delta, oil has been more of a curse than a blessing.
The money really derived from the oil is taken away from them by the government and shared all over, outside this place.
It's said that if the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse represented human rights violations and environmental degradation, then the Niger Delta would qualify as their favorite stomping ground. Nowhere are there more harrowing and pernicious accounts of abuse than in Ogoni land, especially during military rule in the 1990s. It culminated in the execution of prominent activists, including the Ogoni writer Ken Saro-Wiwa. Despite the international outcry, it didn't stop the pollution, with Shell and other oil companies being reportedly responsible for up to 550 spills in 1 year alone. According to the UN report, it'll take 30 years to redeem and remediate the Ogoni environment to its original status. But at least now, after decades of denials and finger-pointing, the Nigerian government finally has a clean-up fund in place. And that's a first, crucial, critical step in the right direction. Just as the presence of oil has become a graveyard of despair for most of the Niger Delta, in Calabar, capital of Cross River State, the absence of it has become a major source of hope. Welcome to the only state in the Niger Delta that doesn't have crude oil. Its oil wells were ceded to neighboring Cameroon following a territorial dispute that was settled against Nigeria a decade and a half ago by the International Court at The Hague. But rather than let their loss become a source of disillusionment, the Cross Riverians turned it into the biggest example of diversification away from oil. The dynamic governor at the time focused his people's fizzing, angry energy on developing their tourism market. Blessed with some of the most breathtaking scenery in West Africa, today the tourism industry here is booming. This cable car is the longest in Africa, set in the Obudu mountain range in the far north of Cross River State. It takes visitors up to the Obudu Mountain Resort at the very top and back down again. This display of carnival dancing is just a rehearsal. When the main event begins at the end of November, the streets of Calabar will be turned into the biggest display of cultural revelry in Africa. Calabar also has an inglorious past.
The museum here is just to showcase the activities and all the things that transpired during the slave trade era, the slave trade period, when slaves were moved from the hinterland to the coastal area for onward transportation to the New World.
There is clearly a lesson here that other oil-dependent states in the Niger Delta and across Nigeria, who have the same kind of abundant history, scenery and culture, can learn from Cross River State's diversification model, which has turned this oil-poor state into the #1 tourist destination in Nigeria. By the end of this road trip, I had seen it all. Bad roads, crazy drivers, and loads of police and military checkpoints. But thankfully, no armed robbers, and at the end of it all, we returned to Abuja in one piece. We travelled through 5 of the country's 6 geopolitical zones, only avoiding the northeast, where the Boko Haram insurgency is still on. No question about it, Nigeria is truly a beautiful country, though after 55 years of independence, much of it remains ignored, underdeveloped, and chaotic. Well, that was 4 years ago in 2015 when President Buhari was just taking over. So what has changed since that time? And we've seen the mood of the people then. What's the mood of the people now? Well, for more on that, I'm joined now in the studio by Prince Ade Omole, who is the leader of the ruling All Progressives Congress Party, the APC, in the UK. Thank you very much indeed for your abiding patience.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
We had to sit through that documentary and all the issues that came up during that documentary. But you supported Buhari
definitely
in 2015. You supported him again in 2019. Talk us through where we are now since President Buhari was first elected in 2015. Has it been a happy journey for the people of Nigeria?
I believe so, actually.
You believe it's been a happy journey?
I believe it's been a happy journey.
But then, of course, you've been living in the UK, haven't you?
Oh, no, but I've always been in and out of Nigeria. I spent most of my time in Nigeria since 2015, helping out in one way or the other. But from the feedback we've actually received from Nigerians in Nigeria and also in the diaspora, that things are actually looking good. We've actually taken the right steps, and we believe that with coming this 2019, we will be improving on every single achievement that we've achieved in the last 4 years. So for me personally, I will first and foremost thank the President for living up to the promises of the campaign in 2015, and now we'll probably be scoring him about 70% at this time, and I'm sure that by the end of this second term in 2023, Nigerians will be happier than what we have at this present time. But the feedback, it's been good. I know there's still a few challenges, but again, looking at where we were in 2013, 2014 to 2015, I think we've done pretty well to this point, especially on the security, anti-corruption, and also the economy. Talking about security, we all understand where we were before 2015 when the APC-led administration actually took over. There were bombs going everywhere. Abuja wasn't that safe. I was in and out of Abuja myself at that present time. That doesn't happen anymore. You see people going out freely, and that's happened all over the country. Yes, we've had a few security challenges in the last couple of months, but I think the security forces have actually been they've been on top of things, and it's looking good. And also looking at the anti-corruption war at this present time. I was actually listening to the chairman of the EFCC, and I can confirm that we have close to about 500 convictions to date. We've actually recovered close to about 1 trillion naira in cash and assets. So that's actually looking good. That's never happened before. And as part of the 2019 budget, For the very first time, we've got close to about 300 billion coming from recoveries, also making part of that revenues for the budget, which is a good thing. And I believe that we will be doing more come from when the ministers are actually sworn in sometime tomorrow in a few hours.
It's very interesting, your perspective on that, because the perspective of a lot of other people, particularly those who are very concerned and who are actually the beneficiaries and the victims of whatever situation happens in Nigeria, is very, very different. I mean, let's take one simple area, unemployment. You talk about things having improved dramatically economically, but the figures from the National Office of Statistics in Nigeria, which is the official government figure, shows that unemployment has tripled since 2015. That's just one area. What is your reaction to that?
If you remember that we did go into a recession immediately, well, as soon as, quite close to when we actually took over in 2015. I mean, obviously, when you have a recession, things will pretty go bad, and that was exactly what happened.
Yeah, but the recession was almost 4 years ago.
Yes, but looking at, when you go into a recession, it does take a long time, sometimes a few times to actually get back on track.
But on what basis are you then saying that the economy has dramatically improved, and that the feedback from the people is that it has dramatically improved?
Well, I was actually looking at the holistic approach to it. I was talking about the security aspect, I was talking about anti-corruption, and also the economy. The economy being the fact that we went into recession, like I was saying earlier on, and that's why we had that lapse and job losses, but we've actually picked up from there, and the trajectory is now upwards. And what we need to do on the next level is actually build on that and actually ensure that we get more jobs, get people to actually invest in the country, get more foreign investment into the country, and actually ensure that we create more jobs. And that's why, actually talking about the jobs, would actually, if you remember, N-Power is actually one of the social investment programs that was actually introduced by this government to actually help also reduce the number of people that were actually out of work, and that actually helped considerably. And that's part of the reason I said the feedback from the people, it's quite favorable in the sense that they know that this government is actually committed to ensuring that at least they're doing something to actually get more people out of poverty. Because at the end of the day, it's actually getting lots of Nigerians out of poverty. The programs, the policies, whatever we're doing, we ensure that at the core of it, it's getting more Nigerians out of poverty. And that's exactly what we will be doing with the next level.
Okay, stay with us, Prince Ade Omole. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about the state of the nation 4 years after Mr Buhari took office and on the eve of the swearing in of his new cabinet. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Now, President Buhari has promised to continue his anti-corruption campaign during his second term. His to-do list also includes reviving a weak economy and tackling insecurity. But many Nigerians say they face an uncertain future. No surprises there, given that the country has a frighteningly high unemployment rate, with youth joblessness standing at over 50% and getting worse every day, with a growing population and many graduates spending their days either doing nothing or looking for casual work. Well, for more on that, let's talk to Prince Ade Omole, who is leader of the ruling All Progressives Congress Party, the APC, in the UK. Thank you for staying with us.
Thank you so much.
Now, the other thing, beyond the statements you've made in support of a government that you're part of, in a sense, the political party that you're part of, the APC. Many people would disagree with your assessment of how things have developed in this country, but it's your prerogative to put your side of the story across. This government of Buhari seems to be in a constant defensive and quarrelsome mode, lashing out to anyone who criticizes it. I mean, we've seen people being jailed for wanting to hold protests. We've seen people being attacked for criticizing the government. Why is there so much apparent hostility from the government towards the populace that it is supposed to be serving?
I think that's quite not the case. I don't believe that's true. That's misleading, I think. It's their constitutional right to actually protest. There are people that protest every day.
But that constitutional right is not being respected.
I see people across your studio, they go to the park, they protest every day. I've seen people around Nigeria protesting every day. No one is actually arresting anyone, and no one is actually stopping them from doing that.
Are you denying the fact that people have been arrested because they wanted to protest?
What I'm saying is, but when you breach the provisions of the Constitution, or when you breach the law, then the police will definitely move in. Like I understand, I believe you're actually talking about the revolution now, people that were actually arrested. Now, that's a different, but when you talk about a revolution, it's different from a protest. When you actually protest, you're protesting that within the provisions of the Constitution. But when you talk about revolution, trying to take down a government that's been democratically elected.
Well, obviously, that's an extreme. No, come on. Prince Omole, you're an educated man.
Of course, definitely.
I mean, you've traveled, you live abroad.
Definitely.
I mean, there are protests every day. People call for revolutions in different things. Revolution in the economy, revolution in education, revolution in providing jobs.
Correct.
It is up to your interpretation of what you mean, what revolution means, to suggest that a young man who is concerned about the high rate of employment in Nigeria, and a young man who's saying to people that we must ensure that our government serves us in the way that we want to be served. And in order for that to happen, we're calling for people to go out on the streets and demand that there is a change. For that to be interpreted as a revolution underscores the exact point that I'm making, that this is a very defensive and quarrelsome regime.
People actually go out to protest on a daily basis. This young man said the DSS will cease to exist on the second day of the revolution. People don't say that. You don't go on the streets and say the DSS will cease to exist. You don't tell them to actually go out there and actually take it by force. Like, I've actually watched that video more than twice. And he said that the DSS will cease to exist. That's no longer a protest.
What about the people like the respected Nobel laureate Wole Soyinka?
He wasn't arrested.
No, I'm not saying he was arrested. The respected Femi Falana, who's a human rights activist, and so on, who have come out in support of that Revolution Now movement, and who were prevented from holding their meetings, which they were going to be hold barely 24 hours.
They are within their rights to actually protest, and I understand that after a few minutes or few hours or so, the same place that was locked up was actually open for them to go in and have a debate.
Having dissipated the energy that was swirling around at that point.
We're not aware of what happened at that present time. And we're not aware of the security reports that the police had. But I understand that at some point, that same venue was actually open for people to go in and have their event. So no one was arrested, nothing happened that was untoward, and this government is actually committed to ensuring that people have their rights and they're able to do whatever they want to do, as long as it's within the provision of the law.
Of course, the interpretation of what is within the provision of the law is elastic, isn't it? As far as this government is concerned. Because, I mean, if you've got some of the most respected senior advocates of Nigeria, constitutional experts, repeatedly saying that the rule of law is being constantly eroded in this country, sounding the alarm, you know, it beggars belief that there is an argument to the contrary that suggests that somehow, by constantly going out prescribing organizations that want to protest in the face of legal legal pronouncements in court in support of them, I mean, it just beggars belief. But let's not belabor that point. Make your point.
Okay, yes. Like I'm not sure whether you've seen the videos of these people that were actually proscribed a few weeks ago.
No, not only have we seen...
They were actually looking at... They don't respect the...
We've had members of the Islamic movement of Nigeria sitting where you're sitting several times. We have dissected their position. We have had government people sitting where you're sitting.
Correct.
So we don't take sides. We're an objective organization that goes down the middle.
Now, the government went to court, and the court actually gave that order, and that was what happened. So it's not for us to say, because we don't have all the facts. A court of competent jurisdiction actually looked at all the facts and actually went ahead with that order. So it's not for us to sit here and say, because of one or two people came onto your studio to say, yes, they were looking at ABCD, and that's why it was wrong for the government to actually go ahead with it. A court of competent jurisdiction actually went, and that actually gave that order for.
Okay, well, let's move on. Let's move on from there and talk about Mr. Buhari himself.
Correct.
How popular do you think he is today compared to when he swept into office in 2015?
I think he's still very much quite popular. People still love him for what he's doing.
Love?
Yes, of course. I mean, as in people like him for what he's doing, and that's why the mandate was actually renewed the second time, even with a bigger margin than what we had in 2015.
Well, obviously, so there's a dispute in court over
it's
his mandate.
But as of today, it's still that vote is still it's still valid. The election is still valid until the court actually make that pronouncement to say to the contrary of that.
Well, of course,
so
but
as of today,
well, he's obviously the president of Nigeria. That's pretty obvious. Do you think, though,
and he's still very much loved by Nigerians?
Do you think he's become less accessible, more remote, more aloof from the Nigerian populace? Because I mean, when he was president, he was very accessible. I mean, you saw that documentary we just put out. I had lots of, just before he became president, I had lots of opportunities to meet him in his house and have a chat with him and so on. But ever since he became president, he's hardly given any interviews at all. But I mean, he's become totally inaccessible to the very people he's supposed to serve.
I remember, and I've seen lots of videos and pictures, and I've been there myself. There are people that go to him every day.
We're not talking about people going to him. We're talking about him making himself accessible to answer questions about his stewardship to the Nigerian people.
I have actually seen a few interviews that he's actually granted. He actually granted one in Dara just a few days ago. During the celebration.
We're not talking about whether he's granted one or two. After all, he did grant an interview to the board of directors. That's not the point. The point is the level. I mean, if you look at even the criticisms of Donald Trump and so on, you see him virtually every day talking to the press. Why is the president so inaccessible to the press?
He's still talking to the press, and I believe he's accessible. I believe he's the members of the press. That's his media aides are also accessible.
He refused to take part in the presidential debates in 2019.
Well, we don't have the reason for that. You don't know the reason for that.
Well, it doesn't matter what the reason is. He's supposed to answer questions about his stewardship.
He can actually do that. He can actually do that without actually going to that particular debate, and he's been doing that even now.
So for somebody like yourself who's as exposed as you are, you don't think the president should stand before the people and answer questions about his stewardship?
Well, he does that most of the time. He's always been doing that, and he will continue to do that. I think he is accessible enough, and remember that he's the president of the country. Obviously, there will be so many demands on him to do one or two things, and we're talking about the next level.
And he does everything else but answer questions about his stewardship.
He does answer questions. I have actually seen him doing that. I've actually seen him actually granting interviews, and I believe he will continue doing that.
All right, Prince Ade Omole, leader of the ruling All Progressives Congress Party, the APC in the UK. We're very grateful to you for coming in. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Well, that's it for this edition of The Arise Interview. Join us again for a fresh edition tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.